How do you keep your camp healthy, happy, and outbreak-free this summer? We sat down with Dr. Greer, a professor and infectious disease expert, to talk about the biggest health risks camps face and how to prevent them. From COVID updates and heat safety to emergency prep, this episode is your must-listen summer health checklist. Camp leaders, win back your time to what matters most, your campers. Bolin's comprehensive accounting, back office solutions, and tech-enabled team free up your staff to focus on your mission. Visit bolinhq.com, that's BOWLINEHQ.com, to learn more and book a free 2-hour financial diagnostic. Remember what sparked your passion for camp? UltraCamp knows it's about the people, not the paperwork. That's why they built a platform to simplify your camp management. Learn more at ultracampmanagement.com/campcode. Welcome to Camp Code, a podcast brought to you by Go Camp Pro. For us in the world of summer camp, there is nothing more important than well-researched, well-planned, well-thought-out, and well-prepared leadership training. It's at the crux of all we do. It's how we deliver a safe, exciting, kind, supportive, growth-filled experience for our campers and their families. It's how we have our staff return year after year, and it's how we make the biggest impact on the world around us. So join us today as we delve into the world of staff training, the good, the hard, and everything in between. We're in it together. Welcome, everybody, to our final episode of Season 12. We're into the end of April here as we record this, and camp is just around the corner. And today, we have the privilege of speaking with an expert, an epidemiologist and university professor who also happens to be not only one of the smartest people I know, but somebody I have known since she was a staff member with me way back in 1995. It's our 30th anniversary. So we're super excited to hear from her and to learn how best to keep our staff and campers safe this summer. But before we dig in, we're going to just take a quick moment to introduce ourselves. So Gabrielle, could you go first, please?
Yes, hey everybody. My name is Gabs. My pronoun are she, her, elle, and I work for Camp Waro. Camp Waro is an all-girls camp that focuses on creating a positive environment for gender minorities, and we do that while speaking French and English.
Thanks, Gab. And Amy Greer, could you introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. My name's Amy Greer. My pronouns are she, her. And as Beth said, I'm an infectious disease epidemiologist and a professor. And my area of research really is understanding the spread of infectious diseases in populations. I'm also a longtime camper and staff member of Glenmore Camp, where I first met Beth almost 30 years ago. And I've also held senior leadership positions at Camp Chinchcook in upstate New York and YMCA Camp Howdy in Port Moody, BC.
Thank you. And I'm Beth Allison. I'm a former camp director and executive director and now a camp consultant. And I'm co-owner of Camp Hacker and Go Camp Pro. My pronouns are she, her. And as always, I have a true passion for intentional leadership training. Well, I am so excited for this podcast for several reasons. One, I think it's going to be really interesting and informative. And two, I get to chat with one of my favorite people, Dr. Amy Greer, or as I know her, NAM, which is her camp name. So you might hear me use that out of habit, but I don't want you to get confused because whether she's NAM or Amy or Dr. Greer, she is brilliant. And I look forward to what she has to share with us. So Gab, I'm going to let you start off with some questions.
Yes. I'm going to go with Nam because it just feels right. Okay, everybody, don't worry. We're not going to be chatting about COVID the entire time. My first question is, though, about COVID because listen, my camp ended up on the news in 2022 because we had to close due to COVID. And we just want to keep our kids safe, want to help our staff feel safe and informed. So let's just start there with COVID and trust listeners, we're not going to stick on this for too long. But where do we stand with COVID these days? Are there still camp specific guidelines we should be thinking about? Or are we like finally at the let's just pack some extra hand sanitizer phase? What are your thoughts on that now?
Yeah. So, I mean, we are still COVIDing. I mean, COVID is not going anywhere at this point in time, right? It's here. It causes respiratory illness in people of all ages. So, you're going to see it in kids, you're going to see it in staff. And it really hasn't settled into that seasonal pattern, right? We still really have COVID year round. And so we can't just kind of think about it as a winter illness. It's still something that's around all the time. Now, certainly, we have lower periods of COVID. And so summer does tend to be a bit lower in terms of COVID circulating around. And where you are in terms of your geography is also going to impact that. So, for instance, where I'm located in Peterborough, Ontario, Canada, right now, we actually have really low COVID. If we look at all of the metrics we measure within our public health unit, we don't have a lot of COVID right now. We do have a lot of other respiratory infections, lots of people with similar symptoms, but it's not COVID right now. But it is safe to say that if you have folks on site who have respiratory symptoms, you cannot discount COVID just because it's the summer.
Mm-hmm.
I think in terms of your second part of your question, like can we just pack extra hand sanitizer? Please, can we just do that? I mean, certainly there are no real camp-specific guidelines related to COVID at this point. You know, it is my personal opinion that I would like to try to avoid getting COVID to the best of my ability, just in general, right? It's easily transmitted. No one wants to get long COVID, and it really like ruins a good time, right? If you have to miss work or camp or stuff that you enjoy doing because you're sick. You said hand sanitizer, you know, hand hygiene, and you'll hear me say this depending on, you know, what else we talk about. Hand hygiene is always in style. Hand hygiene is really important. You know, when we use the bathroom, before we eat, before we have kids set the table in the dining hall, all of those things. But we know a lot more about COVID and how it is and isn't spread. So, in terms of COVID specifically, hand hygiene actually plays a little bit lesser of a role because it's spread through the air.
Yeah.
You know, compared to other types of infectious diseases that are transmitted through that like horrifying, like fecal oral route, right? We don't want things that are transmitted from poop into our mouths. Hand hygiene key in that instance. So, you know, we can continue to reduce the risk of COVID and other respiratory illnesses by doing lots of things that we already do well at camp, right? Outside. If we're inside, make sure the space is well ventilated, right? These are things that we do great in camp because we want to be outside. Having people stay home when they're sick is really important. Wear a mask if we have respiratory symptoms. So, you know, they're not really camp specific guidelines, but they're the things that we really should just continue doing to create a safe community for everybody else who we're interacting with.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we're going to get to more of that with, you know, people that get sick on camp. For the moment, I have recently injured my elbow. And so when I went to the hospital, there was signs for measles and there were signs for, and last year I'm just paying back a favor. A friend of mine also injured themselves. So we were at the hospital and there were signs for whooping cough. Is there, you know, what's in the pipeline for camps this summer? Last summer, I remember literally going on YouTube and listening to what does whooping cough sound like. And our camp doctor was like, everybody needs to know what the sound is. We have to be careful. You know, is this real? How should camps be preparing?
Yeah, this right now to me as an infectious disease epidemiologist is like a person in a lifeboat waving like a giant red flag. Like this
Right.
is a really big deal for us at this moment in time.
Okay.
For a bunch of different reasons, there are a lot of kids that have not received the recommended vaccines to prevent against whooping cough or pertussis. So I may switch back and forth when I'm talking about it just because my brain has a hard time going both ways. So whooping cough, which is pertussis, and measles. And for instance, here in Ontario, where we're located, we are actually at risk of losing our measles elimination status, which we've had since 1998. Thank goodness for vaccines, but we are now racking up on average about 100 new cases a week of measles.
Mm.
So the important thing to remember about this is that, and it's important for your listeners to remember that the vaccination schedule is going to vary. Even within Canada, it varies between provinces to some extent. But in most places, in order to be considered fully vaccinated, and this would be important for both campers and staff, is that kids should have had 2 doses of MMR vaccine to protect against measles. And it's very rare to get measles if you have received 2 doses of vaccine. Infants receive pertussis or whooping cough vaccine when they're little tiny babies. But what sometimes gets missed with whooping cough is that they are supposed to get a booster when they're a teenager, between 14 and 16 in Ontario. And then you are also supposed to get a booster when you are an adult. Those whooping cough ones tend to get missed in older kids, mostly because people just don't realize that they're due. Like they got vaccinated as babies and they don't ever think about the fact that there are some vaccines that you need to continue to get as a booster as you get older because your immunity wanes. So I think there are a few things that camps should be thinking about in regards to measles and whooping cough. One is that in most camp forms, right? The health form asks about vaccination status. And so having information on the vaccine status of the people who are on site is really important, especially now with a focus on pertussis and measles, because knowing that information allows you to know who is going to be at greatest risk. If one of those individuals becomes ill with symptoms that might be similar to what we would see with whooping cough or with measles, it reminds us that that is something we need to be considering. It's important because they're really easily transmitted infections. Camp medical staff should have a plan and review your policies and procedures for infection prevention and control at camp if you had a measles or a pertussis case that's suspected on site in order to minimize the risk to the staff who are dealing with that sick child. Here in Ontario, treatment for pertussis is available if you're early in the course of your illness. So oftentimes those individuals will be treated with antibiotics. And there is also a protocol for contact management. And for pertussis, one of the age groups we're most concerned about are little babies who are less than 1 year old. So typically we don't have a ton of little newborn babies on camps, but that's not always the case. Camp directors, camp families often have little tiny babies on site and pregnant individuals in the 3rd trimester. And so in that case, some of those high-risk people, public health will often offer them prophylactic antimicrobial treatment in order to reduce the risk if they were exposed to someone who had pertussis. So your local public health team can really help you figure out what should be done in that sort of situation. A measles case at camp is also really important to keep in the back of your mind right now, especially in kids who have no vaccine history or, an unclear vaccine history. It can spread. It is the most transmissible pathogen.
Cool.
It's like COVID on steroids in terms of transmissibility. Nobody likes to hear that, but it's true. And it can spread very quickly to other unvaccinated individuals, right? The best part about measles vaccine is that it works really well. So we are mostly worried about other unvaccinated individuals. And so in Ontario, if we have a known exposure to measles in like a school setting or a childcare setting or a hospital healthcare type setting, and the person is unvaccinated and unprotected against measles, those individuals actually are required to stay home. And it can take up to 21 days for an exposed individual to develop symptoms. And the really tricky part is that individuals with measles are infectious before the onset of the rash.
Yeah,
So
of course.
this
course.
is the real trick, right? Is that when you have the rash, then it's really obvious that it's measles. Before you have the rash, you have like fever, cough, runny nose.
Mm.
That could literally be anything, but it can also be measles. So, all of that to say that the measles and the whooping cough stuff is a real issue. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I think that, having a strong plan going into summer related to these two pathogens is really important.
Great. So measles is the jerk of all of them. And no, it can mask as almost anything. Is there any other emerging public health concerns this year that you've seen that camps should be aware of? Because like I said, the measles and whooping cough is just what I've heard on the radio, what I saw at the hospital when I was going, but obviously I'm not in it like you are. Is there anything else we should be paying attention to?
So, I think, and I'm going to come back to the measles thing. I have two things here, but one of them is also related to measles. And I tell this story when I teach infectious disease biology, and the students, like I had my students complete a thing saying, like, what was the most memorable thing you learned in this course? And a bunch of them wrote, when you told us the story about the Drake concert. And I was like, well, at least I've like had a moment with these students, because the story about the Drake concert important. So I tell them, like, this was front page news in Australia, was that somebody had gone to a Drake concert and it turns out they had measles. And if you actually read the article, it has a whole list at the bottom that says, and here are all the other places this person who had measles went. On this specific day, they went to the walk-in clinic in this place. And on this specific day, they went to their local, walk-in clinic in this other place. And on this specific day, they went to the emergency room. And these were all days before the Drake concert. And when we talk about this in class, I say to my students, like, what does this tell us? And they're like, well, I don't know. What it tells us is that right now, the vast majority of medical professionals have never seen measles. And that is really an important thing. So, measles is important for us because we're seeing more and more cases. But from a camp perspective, it is really important to have a conversation about what measles looks like, because many young nurses, many young physicians have not seen measles in real life. They've seen it in a book. And so what most likely happened in the Drake concert was that the person was told, well, you have a fever and a runny nose and a cough. You're not feeling that well. Go home, get some rest, drink some fluids, and, it'll pass eventually. So that's important. So I really think that people need to be keeping measles on top of mind when kids have respiratory symptoms, especially if they're unvaccinated. And you need to know their status. You can know whether or not you might be not an infectious disease related public health concern, but it's really important because we're seeing more and more of this is related to air quality and related to wildfire smoke. And for many camps in many different parts of the world, wildfires, because of climate change, are becoming much more frequent. And air quality is a really important thing for the safety of campers and staff. And so having a plan in terms of figuring out what your approach would be to manage, sometimes extreme levels of wildfire smoke is also a really important thing to kind of think about in advance.
This is so helpful. And I don't want to scare people. That's not the business that we're in, but just so people understand, why is it important to take measles and whooping cough seriously?
Yeah. So, I think whooping cough in the vast majority of individuals causes a very unpleasant illness. Whooping cough does not typically cause mortality or severe illness in older kids.
Okay.
It is incredibly dangerous to very small children, especially small kids who have not received all their vaccines. So, especially if your age group at camp tends to be younger. So, like day camps, for instance, might have a lot of kids on site who are much younger than traditional residential camps, for instance. And also, if you have staff who live on site who have infants, the risk to them is very, very significant. It can lead to very significant illness. Many infants who contract whooping cough are admitted to ICU. Like it's a very, very severe illness in small kids. Measles, the same thing holds. Some kids will have mild disease, but for me, my concern is about the number of kids who will have more severe disease. And it's not possible to perfectly predict which kids will fall into which group. So for me, I would just prefer we not take the risk of seeing which group you fall in. And maybe we should just, try not to get measles to the best of our ability.
That sounds like a great plan. I love it.
All right, we're going to take a short break to hear from our oh so supportive sponsor, and we'll be right back. Camp leaders, do you often find yourself bogged down with bookkeeping, accounting, and other back office tasks, taking precious time away from what matters most, your campers? Imagine a solution that frees up your staff to focus on creating impactful and memorable experiences for your campers. That's where Bolin comes in. Bolin offers comprehensive accounting back office solutions designed specifically for camps. Our tech-enabled team handles everything from payroll and bookkeeping to financial reporting, compliance, expense management, spend control, and more, allowing your staff to passionately pursue your number one purpose. With Bolin, you can streamline your camp's financial operations, reduce stress, and ensure your team is free to make a lasting impact in campers' lives. It's time to win back your time and work with a financial partner that truly understands camps. Whether you're a for-profit, not-for-profit, overnight, or day camp, Bolin has a solution for you. Visit bolinhq.com, that's BOWLINEHQ.com, to learn more and book a free 2-hour financial diagnostic. The report is yours whether you sign up or not. Let Bolin take care of your accounting needs so you can focus on what truly matters, your campers. A special offer from UltraCamp for Camp Code listeners. Get ready for next season's staff recruiting with the Camp Experience Wheel, a powerful tool to prevent burnout, boost retention, and make sure your staff feels supported. Download it for free at ultracampmanagement.com/campcode. Tired of juggling multiple systems? UltraCamp offers a platform that simplifies your work by combining all aspects of camp management into one seamless solution. UltraCamp brings everything you need into one easy-to-use platform. Plan schedules and activities with just a few clicks. Easily organize, schedule, and automate your communications. Register and track campers easily. Manage payments and donations seamlessly. Get back to what you love. UltraCamp helps you spend less time on admin tasks and more time creating unforgettable camp experiences. Ready to see if UltraCamp is the perfect fit? Schedule your free, personalized demo at ultracampmanagement.com/campcode. All right, we are back with Dr. Amy Greer, who's helping us with keeping our kids safe and our staff safe this summer at camp. So, Nam, how about we dive into some of the practical realities at camp? So, a big one for camp directors is a camper gets a fever or the stomach flu, but the parents, and this is for overnight camps, really, really, really want them to stay. What is the clearest way to help parents understand that it's just not the best idea for people at camp or for the child?
Yeah. I mean, I think in this case, it really depends on what the medical team on site thinks is going on, first and foremost, right? There's a lot of variables, there's a lot of different situations. And unfortunately, it's one of those things where it's hard to have like a one size fits all approach. Like, I know that that would be easiest, right? It would be easiest to just say, this is our policy and this is like what we're going to stick to. But it's really hard to do that in this case. And, Beth said that she thought we first met in 1995. And what I was saying is like, I actually think that may have been like the great staph norovirus outbreak at camp may
Yeah.
have been. And
I think it
and
was
like,
actually,
Yeah.
yes.
and let me tell you, it was grisly. Like, it was like horrifying, and no one wants to experience like the horror of norovirus, in a shared room with a shared bathroom. Like, please, let's not do that. And so, I think I always like to assume that if someone is sick and miserable, they are going to be infinitely more comfortable at home. I think that most sick kids want and need both comfort and privacy. And that's just really hard sometimes to get in a camp setting. I think camp staff do an amazing job at this, but you just can't dole it out the same way you can at home with a family member, right? Like, it's just really hard when you're really sick. Managing really super sick kids in, your health center is not the easiest thing to do or the best thing to do. And what I will also say is that as somebody who studies like diseases that are spread from one person to another, the other thing we always have to remember is that a case is a risk factor for everyone else. So they are a risk to everyone else they have contact with. And the longer they remain on site, the more people they are potentially exposing. And it's really difficult to kind of decide what to do in that situation. But certainly having them leave site reduces the risk for everybody else. Especially, we've talked about measles. In the case of measles, they need to be off site like immediately with no flexibility. But I also think that, having policies around, rescheduling missed camp experiences or finding ways to kind of, allow kids to come back, recognizing that, that sometimes means they miss their session with their, typical group or whatever, maybe helps to offset some of that, because it's always disappointing, right? Nobody wants to miss camp. Everybody loves
Of
camp, and
course.
parents don't want their kids to miss it. So, I think that unfortunately for this question, there's just no easy answer. Like, there's just no clear cut answer.
But it's also be prepared, have a
But
plan.
it is also have a plan for
Yeah.
sure.
Okay. These questions have mostly come from Gabrielle, who's dealing with all of this, and they came from her brain. So she's obviously had these particular issues. But going off of that last question, too many kids get sick at camp all at once. Public health may shut camps down. And Gab wants to know if that's actually a thing. Is there like a magic number or a percentage that tips the scales for public health, or do they sort of leave it up to our judgment? How does that work?
So I think there are a number. So I think that it is pretty unlikely right now related to COVID or other respiratory illnesses that we would see that at this point in time.
That's
For
good.
me, the
Yeah.
most likely, yeah, exactly, right? Bonus. For me, the most likely scenario for something like this to happen would be more related to like having a significant outbreak on site that requires management by your local public health unit. So, for instance, if you had kids and staff getting sick from a foodborne disease because it turns out your fridge is not keeping the food at the proper temperature, or you have a bunch of people with gastrointestinal illness because your water treatment setup has failed somehow, and now we have a waterborne illness, right? Those sorts of outbreaks would certainly possibly lead to a situation where, if the situation could not be rectified immediately with the support from your public health unit, that failed sort of public health inspection could certainly cause a pause to have to happen, because we can't neglect thinking about policies and procedures related to things like the provision of safe food and water to everybody on site. The other issue would potentially be if you have a very high proportion of unvaccinated campers, and some camps may be at greater risk of this than others. If you have a very high proportion of unvaccinated campers for measles and you have a measles introduction, if you have a lot of unvaccinated campers, measles could spread very, very rapidly in a kind of like close contact setting like camp. And so in that case, it may be the case that public health may decide to intervene, because measles is like a notifiable disease, and there are a bunch of other issues. But in terms of COVID, I would say no. I think we work really hard to keep our, public health infrastructure around the kitchen and the water up to snuff. So I think that, as long as we're doing those things, hopefully we're not going to end up in a position where that would happen.
Excellent. Gab, I turn it back to you.
Thanks. Well, in this round, we were thinking of doing just a couple of myth busters if you're up for it. So one of the myth busters I have is hand sanitizer really a good as hand washing, or are we all just like, swirling false hope into our hands?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I like
Yep.
hand sanitizer, but soap and water is far superior for a bunch of different reasons. Soap and water and friction. You have to have the
Yes.
friction and you have to have
Yes.
the 20 seconds, right? Happy birthday times two. Can't
Yep.
people love songs? Invent a song, wash your hands to the song, do all the things. The reason is that soap and water gets rid of more pathogens. So, for instance, alcohol-based hand sanitizer does not work against norovirus. Norovirus is really super robust, and alcohol hand sanitizer does not really work well to kill it. And like I said, if you've ever lived through a norovirus outbreak in a dorm or in a camp setting, wash your hands with soap and water to stop that from happening. But hand sanitizer is better than doing no hand hygiene. So absolutely, especially with kids, right? When you're on the go, hand sanitizer is a great augment to your solid soap and water hand washing after you use the bathroom, before you eat, before you set the table, all of those sorts of things. Also, the other thing is some camps have animals.
Yes.
If you have animals on site, hand sanitizer is good for like an in the moment, you're there, use the hand sanitizer, but hand washing, especially when you have animals on site and kids who are interacting with animals, also super important.
That's really good to know. And this sort of goes into my next question. My nephew came to visit in the fall. He's 1 year old. He had the stomach flu. We thought we were safe. I was the one that got sick. So I think it came from the surfaces. Do we still need to disinfect every surface like it's a crime scene? Or is that just like 2020 behavior that's ridiculous?
Yeah, I mean, like a crime scene when someone is sick, right? Like, I mean, if someone is actively sick, yes, let's impose CSI level precautions. But I mean, in general, right? There are surfaces that need to be clean, and those are the things that you should have been maintaining good surface level disinfection on before 2020, right?
Yep.
Kitchen food safety, keep the bathrooms clean and disinfected.
Yep.
Heaven help us disinfect like the equipment that kids share, like instruments or like snorkels, I don't know, like anything they put in their mouth. Do a good job of disinfecting those things. But like we don't need to be sanitizing like the wooden like stump that the kids sit on while they wait for low ropes to start, right? Like we don't need to do that.
Exactly. Okay. Love it. Thank you.
All right. So you've hinted about this already. But we'll see if there's anything more you have to add. But people are always telling us kids are resilient, kids bounce back. Is that true when it comes to viruses, or do we need to be more cautious because they're children?
I like to err on the side of caution personally.
Okay.
I think kids are amazing and resilient in a lot of different ways. I don't love the term resilience when it comes to infectious diseases. Because like I said,
fair.
some kids, yeah, I mean, like some kids might have mild illness, but to me, it's important to consider. To me, even one kid who has severe illness is one kid too many. And so for me, like I said, with communicable diseases, a case is a risk factor for everyone else. And so for me, that's kind of like the deciding factor. And I think that, the price paid for immunity that comes from natural infection can be quite significant for kids. And so I would just always rather to, get the benefit of immunity from a vaccine without the risks that come from that. So, I don't love the term resilient when it comes to infectious diseases.
That's an excellent point.
Yes.
All right. So here's a question I'm kind of afraid of the answer, but we have to ask it anyway. Are viruses actually evolving faster these days, or are we just noticing them more because, we've all got WebMD bookmarked right now?
Yeah, I mean, viruses are amazing, first of all. And I think before COVID, people who didn't work in the field of infectious diseases didn't spend a lot of time thinking about whether or not viruses evolved at all.
Exactly.
Like not
Mm-hmm.
even on the radar. And I think COVID changed that significantly because all of a sudden people were like learning about the fact that, we have these new novel variants of concern and great, they can be immune evasive and they also are more transmissible. Viruses have always had the ability to change over time and they are mutating all of the time. Most of the time, all of those mutations don't really have any benefit for the virus. A lot of them are actually bad for the virus, so they don't actually, get passed on. But when we start to pay attention is when the viruses start to accumulate mutations, which can lead to kind of new strains that have different sorts of properties, right? So with COVID, we were concerned because now they had the ability to evade our immune system, or they can be more easily transmitted, or for things like avian influenza, they might be able to transmit more easily from animals to people. Those are the sorts of things that we tend to really focus on. So it's really not new. I think people are just more newly aware that this is actually a really cool thing about viruses.
Only from an
Sorry.
epidemiologist would you start to hear that phrase. But it's true because I mean the pandemic literally affected all the world. And so
Mm-hmm.
everybody had to stop and pay attention. So that makes perfect sense. All right. Gab, one more question.
Okay, one more question. Okay, for me, this would be my last question. If you had a magic wand and could give camps one universal health rule to live by, I know one. If you want to squeeze in a second, we're fine with that. What would it be? What would you say, hey, camps, please do X or please know about Y?
Yeah, I mean, I think two things go hand in hand. I think really solid hand hygiene and spending as much time as possible outside or in indoor well ventilated spaces. Those two things together are going to help you reduce the risk for a very large number of infectious diseases. They cover your bases in a lot of different ways. And so, as a rule of thumb, those are kind of the two things that I always stress to like my own kids and stress to people is, good hand hygiene and, avoiding stuffy indoor spaces goes a long way.
I love
Perfect.
that. And a lot of camps, our goal is for kids to be outside as much as possible. So this is, goes hand in hand. So I really appreciate it.
And we are now at the point in our podcast where Gab is going to try to recap all of this science that she
Yes,
just learned.
I know. I was just thinking, oh, I'm going to recap science. Definitely. I'm going to say, hey, Miss Sorojitsky, come and listen. That was my science teacher. So, okay, so here we go. recap. Guess what, team? Wah, wah. COVID's still around. Having respiratory issues is still a bummer. So we still have to pay attention. Also, guess what? COVID has old friends that have come back from an ancient place, measles and whooping cough. Yay, we have to pay attention to those, especially whooping measles because it's like camouflaged in other things that could be literally anything. Speaking of literally anything, we're like, how do we know if people are sick or if they're going to be like sick? Check out their vaccinations. We don't need to air it out to a bunch of people, but maybe we should tell our medical staff to pay attention so that if these kids do show signs and symptoms, we know to take actions much quicker and not just treat it as status quo. Speaking of status quo, your status quo is probably out of date. So check in with your local public health. They can help you out with, upping your game when it comes to protocols. Speaking of protocols, did you know that hand sanitizer is pretty darn awesome, but washing hands is even better? What about a little mini session with your staff about washing hands? What about planning in little times in the day where everybody gets to go to the washroom and wash their hands? I know some camps that have actually put in the plumbing around their dining hall so they could optimize their washing hand system. Listen, if you don't have it in the budget, just make it a trip to the bathroom. It's a lot cheaper and it still gets the job done. just talking about all of this information can be really, really, really overwhelming. But honestly, information is what's going to help us protect our campers, protect our staff, and education is number one when it comes to staff training, and the why is super, super helpful. So maybe have them listen to this information, or have somebody from your in Quebec, it's a CLSC, but your local clinic, to maybe come to your camp and talk about the importance of paying attention to our kids and taking care of that hand washing.
And your science teacher would be very proud. Well
She was.
done.
She loves the
All
effort
right.
I would give.
All right. Well, if you have any topics you would like us to discuss or any guests that you would recommend for our next season, we would love to hear from you because, of course, we're all about sharing in this industry. And if you found our podcast to be useful, we would love it if you could give us a rating or review in your podcasting app. So here's how folks can get a hold of you or learn more about what you do. So, Gab, where could they find out about what you do?
You can check out our website at waro.com, and you can get in touch with me at info@waro.com.
And Dr. Greer, is there any place that they can go to find out more about your work?
Sure, you could go to www.amygreer.ca.
Love it.
Perfect. And Greer is Greer. And you can email me directly at beth@gocamp.pro or check us out and all the work that we do at gocamp.pro. And as always, our final segment on each podcast is a best practice for leadership training. And again, for next season, we'd love to hear some of your most memorable moments or effective tips. And this week's best practice is going to come from Dr. Amy Greer. I'm saying it a lot so I don't say NAM.
So I had a hard time like trying to think about like what might be new and what might be kind of like interesting for people that they've maybe not seen before. So one of the things that I wanted to point you to is that there's something called the Canadian Partnership for Children's Health and Environment, and you can find it online at healthyenvironmentforkids.ca. And it talks a lot about air quality risks, and not only in the context of infectious diseases, but also in the context of other issues which can impact the health of kids and staff at camp, things like wildfire smoke, air pollution, all of those sorts of things. So they have a lot of great resources on their site, and it might be worth checking out.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Camp Code is part of the Go Camp Pro podcast network, and you can check out all of our other podcasts at gocamp.pro/podcasts. And thank you once again, Nam, for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to chat with us and to help us all prepare for a safe summer. It was great chatting with you and seeing your pup who curled up on the couch right around the time you started to
So
talk about animals
sweet.
at camp. So it was kind of perfect timing.
Mhm.
And thank you to all of our listeners for joining us on this journey as we work to give our campers and staff and families the best experiences possible. And this is the time in the year when we say thank you to Etienne Cobalt Lefebvre and Matt Wilfred for all the work they do behind the scenes to get these podcasts out and get the information out to all of you. We wish you all the happiest and healthiest of summers, and we look forward to seeing you again in the fall. Thanks for the listening, friends.